Hey y'all, it's Steve, Hobo with Wood Chips. And today's video, I'm going to talk about the difference between 2.5D and 3D CNC engraving. And there's a world of difference. Stay tuned. So as most of you know, I am new to the CNC engraving world and I'm playing with Millmage. I have been waiting on Millmage for over 2 years now, eagerly anticipating the software's arrival and its capabilities. Having become well versed in LightBurn, the idea of being able to incorporate my knowledge of LightBurn with the CNC software tickled me beyond belief, because I did not want to learn an entirely different software and different user interfaces. I looked at some of those years ago and they were very cost prohibitive and very confusing. I did not comprehend a lot of what I was looking at. That was a combination of just not necessarily the most user-friendly interfaces and also just completely Greek terminology. And we're going to talk about a little bit of that today, but also understanding the biggest differences, or the main difference, and it's a huge one, between the ability of 2.5D engraving, which is what Millmage uses, and 3D engraving, which is what you'll see in Vectric and VCarving and some of the more advanced CNC softwares. So in the last live stream, we had the pleasure of having Jack in the shop pop in, and he contributed to the stream and raised a lot of questions, and there was a lot of misunderstanding on my end, and even there was a little bit, he hasn't delved into the world of Millmage and looked at how it was operating, so he was a little bit lost in why Millmage was doing what it was doing. But we got together after the live stream and hammered out the differences. And finally, both of us come to a complete understanding of why it does what it does when it does what it does, and why it isn't always the best possible result. Now, with that said, I still am going to embrace Millmage, try to fully understand how it works, learn the CNC world, along with trying to interpret and learn Millmage. And along the journey, who knows, maybe I can help influence some of its interface. It's help it become more intuitive, because it's still in pre-release. It's not been officially released yet. It's a pre-release candidate, and they are taking feedback from folks such as myself about why things work better this way or that way, or how things could be better or improved. So who knows what I may or may not be able to influence. But the difference between 2.5D and 3D carving. Now you can use a V-bit with 2.5D engraving. So you're using a V-bit and you're carving, but you're not V-carving. Huh? Well, if I'm using a V-bit and I'm carving, and I can V-carve? No, you're not truly V-carving. V-carving in 3D is an entirely different result, and it is nothing like what you can generate in Millmage or any 2.5 3D engraving software, and there's a lot of them out there. So the operations that are built into Millmage for their inlays, I just cannot wrap my mind around the way that it's programmed, and because there's just not enough information built into Millmage at this time to help explain how it is working. And I have not gotten a good explanation of how it's working yet. I'm slowly beginning to fathom different parts of it, but I still don't fully understand the way that it's set up. I don't understand its cut path and the geometry of the cut. And that's why my calculator works so well with 2.5D engraving. But my calculator is pointless for 3D engraving. The difference. 2.5D, you have 2D, which is what we have with our CNC laser engravers. It's moving on the X and the Y. 2.5D moves on the X and the Y and the Z. And 3D moves on X, Y, and Z. So how is 2.5D and 3D different? 2.5D can move on the Z, but it moves in steps. It cannot have a continuous flow of the movement of Z. So, short explanation. If you have a pocket and it needs to be 3 millimeters deep, and you tell it to start at a Z height, where your bit meets your material is 0, start at 0, and it needs to come down 1.5 millimeters, and then a second pass of an additional 1.5 millimeters. It's going to drop, it's going to do its plunge in a ramp or zigzag, however you do it, 1.5 millimeters, and it's going to engrave or cut out that entire pocket. Then it's going to plunge the second 1.5 millimeters and engrave that pocket. It does not have the ability to move on the Z while the X and Y is moving. 3D engraving can move X, Y, and Z simultaneously. It can do it all at one time. So you can get a true ramp on the Z with 3D engraving. Not with 2.5D. It can step down, but it can't flow. So when you're VCarving with a V-bit in 3D, it allows you to get in, to have really detailed areas of the carve, because the tip of the V-bit can ascend, and when it ascends, because the V-bit is an angled point, as it goes up on the material, that cut path is getting narrower, all right? It's getting smaller. So you can have varying widths and details of your carve with 3D V-bit engraving. It's not so easy with 2.5D. 2.5D, you're still engraving with that V-bit, so your wall of your engraving is still going to be at an angle, but it's a constant depth. And there's a term that I've heard where people talk about flat depth in VCarving. And coming from a novice, flat depth was a little confusing, because initially I was thinking flat depth is pocket depth. They are not the same. Flat depth, when you're discussing V-carving, is the absolute depth of where the V-carve is in fact flat. Because in 3D V-carving, you have those tapers or those ramps up the sides of the carve. So it's asking, well, if those are all tapers, well, that's not flat. Those few places that it's truly at its maximum depth, at its flat depth, what is that depth? So you'll set your flat depth, and then the tapers will change as the design dictates it. Okay? You do not have that ability with 2.5D. 2.5D is a constant depth. And that makes it difficult to get the detail and the sharp points that you can get with VCarving. You can still get pretty good results, but it does require additional techniques. When you are VCarving in 3D, your bit is going to travel the line of your image, your text, whatever. It's going to cut the line. It's going to engrave the line. And the shape of your image will dictate how deep it's going to be at any given point. If the shape requires it to be a narrow point, it will raise that bit accordingly. You don't have any of that in 2.5D. So in 2.5D, what they do, and what Millmage has built into it, is instead of cutting the line, it will cut inside the line for female pockets, and it will cut outside the line for male pockets. And then this is where I get lost. Depending on where, because your cut depth, you're on a V-bit, the deeper you go, your contact point where the top surface is for your material is going to determine how far that comes inside or outside the line, to my understanding. So if you are coming 3 millimeters down, it's going to have to come over or more outside the line or more inside the line, because you're doing a wider cut with your V-bit. If you're doing only a 1 millimeter pocket, then your cut path is not going to be as wide, so it's got to adjust for that. And all of that's done automatically within the calculations of Millmage and the operations for a male or female pocket. But since I want to understand what's going on, and I don't understand all of what's happening there, I think I'm starting to get a handle on it. I like, because we don't have true 3D VCarving, and I don't understand what's happening, and using the cut inside and outside the line, it doesn't give you the optimal fit. It can leave glue gaps on the top surface. It may not fit as tightly as you would hope. It's definitely not going to fit as nice as true 3D carving. But my calculator for calculating offsets, desired offsets for female and male pockets, does give a better fit than doing inside and outside the line, because I am cutting the line. I'm not asking the machine to do all the calculations and all that. I've done all that, figured it all out in my calculator, and say, okay, well, this is what I want, and I want to have, if I want to have this depth, then I need to have this much offset to have a male inlay that's going to fit in there and fit it tight as a bug in a rug. As tight as it can in 2.5D. because it's 2.5D, those really fine areas, you just can't really get there with the 2.5D engraving. The bit needs to ascend and change your cut depth for those really fine areas. We don't have that ability. So you have to eliminate those. So I've played with multiple engraving inlays and different styles and techniques, and this one is one of the pockets that failed. This was one of the first attempts, and and excuse the background noise. This I did with the font as is, and I did Arial round, but I left some slightly pointed areas on the Arial round on the letters like the W's and the W's and the E's and the M's, and you can see what happened. A combination of two things. It was too sharp of a point, and my feed and speed rates were too much, that I was putting too much force on the material, too fast, too much load, and it just caused blowouts. So if I focus there, you can see on the M there, it's got the blowout, and up there on that W, lots and lots of blowout there. I'd lost a lot of the detail. And the inner part of the E, it's just completely gone. You know, it should be like these down here, but it got chipped out because of my feed and speed rates. I was asking it to do too much at one time, and it broke it off. So I made some changes. And the first, what I did was I went into the text, and any point that came to a point that was less than a millimeter, I just rounded them off. I put a radius on it and got rid of those sharp points and put radiuses on those sharp points. But I also slowed the machine down, slowed my feed rate down, decreased my step over, so I didn't work it as hard. I wouldn't put as much load on it, and got better results. And I also found another problem with the actual G code and the settings in the G code that I had made corrections for. But I did this first line of text using Millmage's built-in operations of female and male inlays with the cutting inside and outside the line. And what I'm getting ready to show you, the letter D and down, what you see a lot of is actually the imperfections in the grain, and it looks worse than it is because of the discoloration of the wood. But ignore that and look at the overall fit of how the letters and the gaps in between the letters of down to. So let me get this up here, and we're going to focus on down to. There you go. And you see the gap in between the letters? It's really bad over there on that O. But there's gaps even around the W and the N and down. Get up there. There we go. See that little gap in there? And even there. Like I said, those are actually flaws in the material, not the inlay. But the fit and finish is not what I would want to see. So I made some changes. I went away from using Millmage's pockets, cutting inside and outside the line, and used my method with the offset and cutting the line, and I feel like that's a much better fit. Look at that, how tight that letter I is. Now there was some blowout in that W there from the walnut, but I like that much better than I like that. That's just loose, not as tight. That's much cleaner and a much better result. and that was a result of using the offset method and cutting the line. So I think there's, and I say this all the time in Hobo with Wood with the laser and LightBurn, there's always another way. There's always another way. So cutting inside and outside the line is one way, and it's not a wrong way, but I do feel like you get a better result with the cutting the line and using the offset. Problem is, there's more steps involved in doing it my way, but I have more control. I have more ability to control the fit around the perimeter. There's a small little gap there in my first attempt, but I actually have the ability to change that with the settings in my calculator to where I can make it an even tighter fit. You don't have any control at all using the operations for the inlays, the inlay operations built into Millmage. Well, I say you don't. You do have the ability to leave additional material. So yes, you could, and you could get with enough time and practice and experience, and if you consistency, if you're using different materials all the time, and your bits are you get wear and get dull, then that's all going to change. But if you're using the same materials and you're doing lots and lots of tests, you could potentially get the operations in Millmage dialed in to give you a similar result as mine. And I need to play with that. I need to try, because I want to embrace the way that they've got this going, but I got to understand what it's doing, why it's doing what it's doing, when it does what it does, so I can fully understand how to make the necessary adjustments. And there is absolutely no clarity whatsoever on what their setups are doing, and it will get better. Their documentation will get better. It's still in pre-release. It's not been officially released yet. It'll get better. I trust that it'll get better, and I do not intend to bail on Millmage or jump ship. I want to learn my CNC and develop my CNC capabilities using Millmage and nothing else, because I've got a ton of knowledge, libraries, graphics, everything from LightBurn that will work perfectly in Millmage. So why would I want to go and learn a whole new software? So that's the difference between 2.5D and 3D. 2.5D will step down the Z in increments, in steps. It cannot move in a continuous flowing motion. 3D carving, 3D inlay, 3D VCarving can move the Z in a continuous flowing motion, up and down, X and Y, and flow continuous in all three axes. 2.5D, X, Y, Z, X, Y, Z, X. So that is the difference between 2.5D and 3D engraving. And I do have to give a huge shout out to Jack for helping me understand what was happening, why what was happening, the difference between the two. And he had not explored Millmage that much, and so he didn't realize that's what Millmage was doing, and that's what led to his little bit of confusion. But a lot was learned over the past 3 or 4 days. I had intended to do some testing, but once we come to that epiphany, that light bulb moment, there was no need to test anything. Now we know why it does what it does and the difference between the two. So hopefully you found this informative. If you are, jumping into CNC world from lasers, I encourage you to use Millmage. Follow along with us, and we'll learn together. If you have any contributing information that you can share and bestow upon this mind that's wanting to learn, put it in the comments. If you're a troll who just wants to be a troll, go back under your bridge and keep your opinions to yourself. I'm Steve, Hobo with Wood Chips. I appreciate your time. I appreciate your eagerness to follow the adventures of this new chapter in Hobo with Wood. And I'll see you in the next video. Be sure you like, share, and subscribe. I'm Steve, Hobo with Wood Chips. And I'm out.